Right now, Quebec's sovereignty movement is still alive and kicking. Recent polls show support for independence hovering around 35%, and the Parti Québécois is actively pushing for another referendum. The debate over federalism and national identity continues to shape Canadian politics with no end in sight. And it all traces back to a single, razor-thin vote in 1995. Imagine a ballot box being emptied, and the count reveals a margin so small, it's almost unbelievable. Just 54,288 votes separated Quebec from a potential break with Canada. That's fewer than the number of people who attended a single pro-Canada rally in Montreal just days before the vote. In a province of over 4.7 million voters, that's how close it came to splitting the nation. In 1995, Quebecers turned out in record numbers. 93.52% of registered voters cast ballots. To put that in perspective, imagine almost everyone you know showing up to vote. Your neighbors, your coworkers, your barista. For comparison, the average Canadian federal election sees about 60% turnout. This was a province holding its breath, deeply divided, and desperate to be heard. The referendum question itself was a masterpiece of ambiguity. Do you agree that Quebec should become sovereign after having made a formal offer to Canada for a new economic and political partnership? Many yes voters believed they were endorsing a reformed federal relationship, not full independence. Look at a voter scratching their head, because even experts argued over what sovereign really meant. On one side, a yes button promises sovereignty. On the other, a map of Canada with Quebec highlighted. But a question mark hovers over the map. What would happen to Quebec's relationship with Canada? The yes side proposed sovereignty association, keeping the Canadian dollar and open borders, but no one knew if Canada would agree. It was a gamble wrapped in a promise. This wasn't a spontaneous idea. The referendum was built on Bill 1, the act respecting the future of Quebec, and a pact signed on June 12, 1995 by the Parti Québécois, the Bloc Québécois, and the Action Démocratique du Québec. These three parties united to present a united front, but even they disagreed on the path forward. The document declared that sovereignty would only come after a formal offer of partnership, and if negotiations failed, Quebec would go it alone. When the votes were tallied, the no side won with 50.58%, just 54,288 votes out of 4.7 million. Look at this bar graph. The no bar is only a sliver taller than yes. That margin is magnified and labeled because it was the difference between unity and separation. In any other election, that would be a recount. Here, it defined a nation's future.
He wants to become an architect, but when he's still in his teens, his father steers him into politics. He will take to that rough and tumble world like a fish to water.
At 13, I was distributing pamphlets and putting the posters on the walls and placing
Then came the ads. In the final weeks before the vote, the federal government poured $5 million into a blitz of pro-Canada television commercials. They showed maple leaves, smiling families, and a warm voice promising that staying together meant stability. It was a last-minute push, and it may have been just enough. And then, the rally. On October 27th, 1995, 150,000 Canadians flooded downtown Montreal, a sea of red and white flags stretching block after block. They came by bus, by train, from across the country, waving signs that read, "My Canada includes Quebec." That massive show of unity sent a message. The rest of Canada was watching. But not everyone in Quebec wanted out. Indigenous communities held their own referendums and voted overwhelmingly to stay in Canada. Among the Cree, 96.3% chose Canada, a near-unanimous rejection of separation. For them, leaving Canada wasn't liberation. It was losing their rights and recognition within a larger federation. Look at this map. The vast northern territory of Quebec, mostly Cree land, is a huge chunk of the province's area. In those communities, the ballot was clear, a firm no to sovereignty. When you zoom in on a Cree polling station, you see a people choosing their future within Canada, not outside. And the Inuit of Nunavik were just as emphatic. In their community centers, signs read no in bold letters, and the final tally hit 96% against sovereignty. For them, Canada meant access to healthcare, education, and land claims that Quebec couldn't guarantee. Their vote was a quiet but powerful counterweight to the Yes campaign. When the results came in, headlines across Canada shouted relief. Canada stays together. But the margin was so thin, just 54,288 votes, that it felt less like a victory and more like a near-death experience. The celebration was muted because everyone knew the next time it might tip the other way.
But he'll never feel comfortable there.
You go into politics because you have to, in a sense, use politics to achieve certain objectives.
So Canada did something about it. In 2000, Parliament passed the Clarity Act, a law that says any future referendum must ask a clear question and get a clear majority, not just a simple 50% plus one. The idea: no more confusion, no more 49.42% ambiguity. But that law also sparked anger in Quebec, where many saw it as Ottawa dictating the rules of their own future. But even before the Clarity Act, Canada's highest court had already weighed in. In 1998, the Supreme Court ruled that Quebec couldn't just up and leave. Unilateral secession was illegal. If Quebec wanted to go, it would have to negotiate with Canada first. That judgment gave Ottawa legal backing to set the rules of the game, and the Clarity Act went further. It gave the House of Commons the power to decide if a future referendum question was clear enough, and what counted as a clear majority. That last part is the real kicker. A simple 50% plus one might not cut it. Suddenly, the threshold for leaving wasn't just a number. It was a political football. But while Ottawa was tightening the legal screws, a different kind of story was unfolding, one that would actually boost support for sovereignty. In the late 1990s, the federal government launched a sponsorship program to promote Canada in Quebec. It poured millions into ads, festivals, and events. But much of that money ended up in the wrong hands. By 2002, the sponsorship scandal was a full-blown crisis. A public inquiry revealed that millions had been funneled to ad agencies with ties to the Liberal Party, with little to show for it. Quebecers felt duped. The scandal didn't just waste money, it fueled a renewed sense of grievance. Sovereignty support jumped back up, and the Parti Québécois was ready to ride that wave. In the 2000s and 2010s, PQ leaders like Pauline Marois and later Jean-François Lassie kept the flame alive. They argued that the Clarity Act was an affront to Quebec's democratic will. Their message: if Canada won't let us leave fairly, we'll keep asking until we get a vote that counts.
Said, Jean, do whatever you want, but I would appreciate it if you would stay. And the only question he asked me said, do you believe in Canada?
That persistence is why, even today, support for independence hovers around 35%. That's not a majority, but it's a solid base, and it hasn't faded. Young Quebecers, who didn't live through 1995, are often just as open to sovereignty as their parents were. The question lingers unresolved, like a tune you can't quite shake. So here we are, decades later, still arguing over the same thing. The 1995 referendum may be history, but its ghost haunts every debate about Quebec's future. That razor-thin margin, that vague question, those 54,288 votes, didn't settle anything. They just gave Canada and Quebec a script for the next act, still being written. Those 54,288 votes didn't just end a referendum. They launched a chain reaction. In 2000, Ottawa passed the Clarity Act, demanding a clear question and a clear majority for any future secession bid. Then came the sponsorship scandal. Over $100 million in federal per-unity funds misdirected, a corruption probe that ironically fueled sovereignty support. By 2025, polls show independence backing at 35%, and the Parti Québécois still calls for a third referendum. Zoom out to the map. Quebec pulses at the heart of Canada, but its place remains unsettled. A split screen shows the maple leaf and the fleur-de-lis, side by side, unresolved. Every federal election reignites the question, what does Quebec want? The 1995 referendum didn't answer that. It just made the question sharper, the stakes higher, and the silence between the two flags more charged. If this story of razor-thin margins and lingering questions gripped you, subscribe and hit the bell. We dive deep into the moments that shape nations, one vote, one scandal, one turning point at a time.